San Antonio, January 2007. A cold but clear day. The city was living its usual life. Traffic jams on the highway, lines at gas stations, kids with backpacks rushing to school. No one could imagine that, at that same hour, in one of the shopping centers, a story was beginning that would end up in the crime chronicles. EB Games was a small store in a row of almost identical storefronts, bright posters with new releases, shelves stacked with game cases, the smell of fresh plastic and paper. Everything there was soaked in the atmosphere of childhood and fun. For 25-year-old Amber Belken, this store had become a second home. She came in earlier than everyone else, checked the shelves, arranged the discs. The staff joked that she was the one who kept the store in shape. Amber smiled at customers and knew the regulars by name. She was that kind of girl from the store people were happy to see even if they had just dropped by to grab a game. The morning started out quietly. The first customers were picking out gifts. Amber was working at her usual pace. Nothing seemed to foreshadow what was coming. But in the afternoon, something went wrong. When a coworker came into the store closer to evening, he noticed something unsettling. Silence. The register was open, and there was no one in the sales floor. He called for Amber and there was no answer. In the back room there was chaos. Overturned boxes, crumpled packaging, and there she was. Amber was lying on the floor. There was a plastic bag over her head. She was not breathing. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The store that had been full of life that morning turned into a crime scene. From that second on, the story stopped being just a workday of a young woman. It turned into a nightmare that would change the lives of several people at once. When the news of Amber's murder spread through San Antonio, the city froze. A young woman killed right at her workplace was a nightmare no one had expected. The media camped out by the shopping center. Police tape kept onlookers back. In the homicide division, no one doubted it. The case had to be solved quickly, and the first logical step was to look at those who knew Amber best. Her coworker Brandon ended up in the spotlight. People said different things about him. Handsome, sociable, but irresponsible. He was late, mixed up orders, slacked off. Amber, who did everything by the book, was tired of pulling his weight. She had even been planning to complain to management. To the investigators, it looked like a ready-made motive. A complaint could cost him his job, and getting fired would mean not just losing a paycheck, but humiliation. Brandon was called in for questioning, tough, with no unnecessary formalities. In a room with peeling walls, he sat under a neon light, facing two detectives. Hour after hour, they pressed him. "You were angry at her, right? You threatened her. Where were you at the time of the murder?" He kept repeating the same thing. "I did not do this." But words meant little. In his face, the detectives saw nerves. In his gestures, uncertainty. For several days, it seemed like he was the one, the killer. The press hinted at it. Coworker under suspicion. People started whispering behind his back, but there was not enough evidence. And then a detail appeared that changed everything. An alibi. Records and witnesses confirmed that at the time of the murder, Brandon was somewhere else, a place where he physically could not have been with Amber. For the police, it was a blow. Their main version of events fell apart. The killer was still out there, and at that point another name was spoken in the department for the first time in a long while, a name everyone had almost forgotten: Giovanni Rivera. When the name Giovanni Rivera came up again in the investigators' conversation, it was like something clicked in the air. Not some random guy, not a passerby. This was someone who already lived inside this story. A former employee. A man who once opened that same door, smiled at those same customers, stood at that same register. But after he was fired, it was like he never really left. His shadow kept circling around the store. Workers noticed that he would come in, wander around aimlessly, let his gaze linger for too long, as if he could not let the place go, as if he was waiting. And then came a turn no one expected. His wife went to the police. Her name was Veronica. She sat down across from the detectives, folded her hands and seemed to lose her breath. Then she started to talk. She said that night Giovanni had confessed. He did not shout, did not break down. He just breathed it out, calmly, almost indifferently. He told her he only wanted money, nothing personal. Go in, take the cash and disappear. But Amber was there. She got scared, screamed, tried to pull away, and then he snapped. He grabbed a bag, pulled it over her, waited until everything went quiet. Veronica spoke, and the detectives felt a chill down their backs. This was not a guess, not a theory, it was a confession straight from the source. When they came for Rivera, he was already trying to leave. His old sedan was heading south, straight toward the Mexican border. He knew that once he crossed that line, finding him would become almost impossible. But he did not make it. They intercepted him on the highway. Headlights, sirens, handcuffs, the end. And you know what was the scariest part? He did not resist, did not scream, did not deny anything. He just stared at the ground and confirmed every word his wife had said. Yes, I did it. Yes, for money. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that phrase, the wrong place at the wrong time, sounded worse than any sentence, because it reduced her life to an accident, to a date and time on the calendar. For the city, it was a shock. The killer turned out to be not a stranger. He was one of their own. When the case went to trial, the city started buzzing again. The defendant's table, the prosecutor on the left, the defense attorney on the right. Behind them, journalists hungry for every word. And in the middle, Giovanni Rivera. He did not deny anything. He did not play the innocent man. He did not try to invent a story. He simply said, "Guilty." And that was it. That plea took all the drama out of the process, but gave it a kind of icy simplicity. The courtroom fell silent, because now there was only one question left. How many years would he spend behind bars? The judge read out the sentence in a dry voice. Life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. 30 years. For Amber, it was forever. For her family too. But for him, there was still a sliver of hope. And that was exactly what many people saw as an insult. While Amber's parents were mourning their daughter, another story was unfolding in the city. Brandon's story. The same guy everyone had been pointing at in the first days. The one people looked at as if he were the killer. The one neighbors and journalists talked about behind his back. He survived that pressure, but his life had cracked. He lost his job, his friends, his reputation was dragged through the mud. And only years later, when the case was finally closed for good, did he slowly start to rebuild. In 2018, his name appeared in the news again, but this time not in the crime section. He saved a girl, carried her out of a burning car. People wrote about him as a hero, and there was a strange, bitter paradox in that. A man who had once been seen as a killer had become a symbol of rescue. But none of these stories can erase the main truth. Amber is gone. Her life ended in that store, among the registers and displays where no one expected to see death. And every time customers walked into EB Games, many of them caught themselves thinking, this was not just a store, it was the place where the city lost its innocence. Giovanni is sitting in prison. Brandon has built a new life. But the name Amber Belken still hangs over San Antonio like a reminder. The scariest stories do not always happen somewhere out there in dark alleys. They happen right next to us, in the places where we feel safe, and that is exactly what makes them truly terrifying.